The Elephant's Child. In the high and far-off times, the elephant, O best beloved, had no trunk. He had only a blackish, bulgy nose, as big as a boot, that he could wriggle about from side to side. But he couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who was full of satiable courteosity, and that means he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all Africa with his satiable courteosities. He asked his tall aunt the ostrich why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt the ostrich spanked him with her hard claw. He asked his tall uncle the giraffe what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle the giraffe spanked him with his hard hoof. And still he was full of satiable courteosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so, and his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy paw. And still he was full of satiable courteosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw, or heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched, and all his uncles and his aunts spanked him. And still he was full of satiable courteosity. One fine morning, in the middle of the procession of the equinoxes, this satiable elephant's child asked a new fine question that he had never asked before. He said, "What does the crocodile have for dinner?" Then everybody said, "Hush!" in a loud and dreadful tone, and they spanked him immediately and directly without stopping for a long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon Kolo Bird sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, "My father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me, all my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my satiable courteosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner." Then Kolo Bird said with a mournful cry, "Go to the banks of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, and find out." That very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes, because the procession had proceeded according to precedent, this satiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little short red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purple kind, and 17 melons, the greeny crackly kind, and said to all his dear families, "Goodbye, I am going to the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to find out what the crocodile has for dinner." And they all spanked him once more for luck, though he asked them most politely to stop. Then he went away, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he couldn't pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Karma's country, and from Karma's country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as Kolo Bird had said. Now, you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till that very week, and day, and hour, and minute, this satiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile, and didn't know what one was like. It was all his satiable courteosity. The first thing that he found was a bicoloured python rock snake curled around a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, most politely, "but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" "Have I seen a crocodile?" said the bicoloured python rock snake in a voice of dreadful scorn. "What will you ask me next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but could you kindly tell me what he has for dinner?" Then the bicoloured python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant's child, "because my father and my mother and my uncle and my aunt, not to mention my other aunt, the hippopotamus, and my other uncle, the baboon, have all spanked me for my satiable courteosity, and I suppose this is the same thing all over again." So he said goodbye very politely to the bicoloured python rock snake, and helped to coil him up on the rock again, and went on, a little warm but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up, till he trod on what he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it was really the crocodile, O best beloved, and the crocodile winked one eye, like this. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" Then the crocodile winked the other eye, and lifted half his tail out of the mud, and the elephant's child stepped back most politely because he didn't wish to be spanked again. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but my father has spanked me, my mother has spanked me, not to mention my tall aunt, the ostrich, and my tall uncle, the giraffe, who can kick ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and my hairy uncle, the baboon, and including the bicoloured python rock snake with the scalesome flailsome tail, just up the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so, if it's quite all the same to you, I don't want to be spanked any more." "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "for I am the crocodile." And he wept crocodile tears to show it was quite true. Then the elephant's child grew all breathless and panted and kneeled down on the bank and said, "You are the very person I have been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner?" "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "and I'll whisper." Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his little nose, which up to that very week, day, hour, and minute had been no bigger than a boot, though much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, "I think today I will begin with elephant's child." At this, O best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this, "Let go! You are hurting me!" Then the bicoloured python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, "Sss, my young friend, if you do not now know, immediately and instantly pull as hard as ever you can. It is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large pattern leather ulster," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you into yonder limpid stream before you can say, 'Sss, Jack Robinson, sss.'" This is the way the bicoloured python rock snake always talks. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches and pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch, and the crocodile floundered into the water, making it all creamy with great sweeps of his tail, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and the elephant's child's nose kept on stretching, and the elephant's child spread all his four little legs and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose kept on stretching, and the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and at each pull the elephant child's nose grew longer and longer. Oh, and it hurt him. Oh! Then the elephant's child felt his legs slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." Then the bicoloured python rock snake came down from the bank and knotted himself in a double clove hitch around the elephant child's hind legs and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveller, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelling man-of-war with the armour-plated upper deck," and by this, O best beloved, he meant the crocodile, "will permanently vitiate your future career." This is the way all bicoloured python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bicoloured python rock snake pulled hardest. And at last the crocodile let go of the elephant's child's nose with a plop that you could hear all the way up and down the Limpopo. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden. But first he was careful to say, "Thank you," to the bicoloured python rock snake, and next he was kind to his poor pulled nose, and wrapped it all up in cool banana leaves, and hung it in the great grey-green greasy Limpopo to cool. "What are you doing that for?" said the bicoloured python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape, and I am waiting for it to shrink." "Then you will have to wait a long time," said the bicoloured python rock snake. "Some people do not know what is good for them." The elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for his nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter, and besides it made him squint. For, oh, best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into a really truly trunk, same as all elephants have today. At the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and stung him on the shoulder, and before he knew what he was doing, he lifted up his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Try and eat a little now." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs, and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he slooped up a sloop of mud from the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool, sloopy, sloshy mud cap, all trickly behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but I should not like it at all." "How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bicoloured python rock snake. I should like it very much indeed," said the elephant's child. "Well," said the bicoloured python rock snake, "you will find that your new nose very useful to spank people with." "Thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to all my dear families and try." So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled down fruit from a tree instead of waiting for it to fall as he used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground instead of going on his knees as he used to do. When the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk. And he made himself a new, cool, slushy, squishy mud cap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went specially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus. She was no relation of his, and he spanked her very hard to make sure that the bicoloured python rock snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time, he picked up the melon rinds that he had dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy pachyderm. One dark evening he came back to all his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk, and he said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him, and immediately said, "Come here and be spanked for your satiable courteosity." "Pooh!" said the elephant's child. "I don't think you peoples know anything about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked 2 of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, bananas!" said they. "Where did you learn that trick? And what have you done to your nose?" "I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks ugly," said his hairy uncle, the baboon. It does," said the elephant's child, but it's very useful," and he picked up his hairy uncle, the baboon, by one hairy leg and hove him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time, till they were very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich aunt's tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle, the giraffe, by the hind leg and dragged him through a thorn bush. And he shouted at his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and blew bubbles into her ear when she was sleeping in the water after meals. But he never let anyone touch Colo Colo Bird. At last things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one in a hurry to the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody any more. And ever since that day, oh best beloved, all the elephants you will ever see, besides all those that you won't, have trunks precisely like the trunk of the sociable elephant's child. How the Camel got his hump. Now this is the next tale, and it tells how the camel got his big hump. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel, and he lived in the middle of a howling desert, because he did not want to work, and besides he was a howler himself. So he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles, most excruciating idle, and when anybody spoke to him he said, "Humph!" just "Humph!" and no more. Presently the horse came to him on Monday morning, with a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the horse went away and told the man. Presently the dog came to him with a stick in his mouth and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and fetch and carry like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the dog went away and told the man. Presently the ox came to him with the yoke on his neck and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and plough like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the ox went away and told the man. At the end of the day the man called the horse and the dog and the ox together and said, "Three, oh three, I'm very sorry for you with the world so new and all, but with Humph thing in the desert, not able to work, or he would have been here by now, so I'm going to leave him alone, and you must work double time to make up for it." That made the three very angry with the world so new and all, and they held a palaver and a powwow on the edge of the desert. And the camel came chewing milkweed, most excruciating idle, and laughed at them. Then he said, "Humph!" and went away again. Presently there came along the Jinn, in charge of all deserts, rolling in a cloud of dust. Jinns always travel that way because it's magic, you see. And he stopped to palaver and powwow with the three. "Jinn of all deserts," said the horse, "it is right for any one to be idle, is it, with the world so new and all?" "Certainly not," said the Jinn. "Well," said the horse, "there's a thing in the middle of your howling desert, and he's a howler himself, with a long neck and long legs, and he hasn't done a stroke of work since Monday morning. He won't trot." "Phew," said the Jinn, whistling through his nose. "That's my camel. For all the gold in Arabia, that's my camel for you. What does he say about it?" "He says, 'Humph!'" said the dog, "and he won't fetch and carry." "Does he say anything else?" "Only 'Humph!' and he won't plough," said the ox. "Very good," said the Jinn. "I'll humph him if you will kindly wait a minute." Then the Jinn rolled himself up in his dust cloak and took a bearing across the desert, and found the camel most excruciatingly idle, looking at his own reflection in a pool of water, like camels always do. "My long and bubbling friend," said the gin, "what's this I hear of you doing no work, with the world so new and all?" "Humph!" said the camel. The gin sat down with his chin in his hand and began to think a great magic spell, while the camel looked at his own reflection in the pool of water, like he always did. "You've given the 3 extra work ever since Monday morning, all on account of your excruciating idleness," said the gin, and he went on thinking magics with his chin in his hand. "Humph!" said the camel. "I shouldn't say that again if I were you," said the gin. "You might say it once too often." "Bubbles," said the gin. The magic word. "I want you to work." And the camel said, "Humph!" again. But no sooner had he said it than he saw his back, that he was so proud of, puffing up and puffing up into a great big lolloping humph. "Do you see that?" said the gin. "That's your very own humph, that you brought upon your own self by not working. Today is Thursday, and you've done no work since Monday, when the work began. Now you are going to work." "How can I?" said the camel, with this humph on my back. "That's made a purpose," said the gin, "all because you missed those 3 days. You will be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you live on your humph. And don't you ever say that I never did anything for you. Come out of the desert and go to the 3 and behave. Humph yourself." And the camel humphed himself, humph and all, and went away to join the 3, and from that day to this the camel always wears a humph. We call it hump now, not to hurt his feelings. But he has never yet caught up with the 3 days that he missed at the beginning of the world, and he has never yet learned how to behave. How the Leopard got his spots. In the days when everybody started fair, best beloved, the Leopard lived in a place called the High Veld. Remember, it wasn't the low veld, or the bush veld, or the sour veld, but the exclusively bare, hot, shiny high veld, where there was sand and sandy-coloured rock, and exclusively tufts of sandy yellowish grass. The giraffe and the zebra and the eland and the kudu and the hartebeest lived there, and they were exclusively sandy yellow-brownish all over. But the leopard, he was the exclusivest, sandiest, yellowest, brownest of them all, a greyish-yellowish, catty-shaped kind of beast, and he matched the exclusively yellowish, greyish-brownish colour of the high veld to one hair. This was very bad for the giraffe and the zebra and the rest of them, for he would lie down by a exclusively yellowish, greyish-brownish stone or clump of grass, and when the giraffe or the zebra or the eland or the kudu or the bushbuck or the bontybuck came by, he would surprise them out of their jumpsome lives. He would indeed. And also there was an Ethiopian with bows and arrows, a exclusively greyish, brownish, yellowish man he was then, who lived on the high veldt with the leopard, and the two used to hunt together, the Ethiopian with his bows and arrows, and the leopard exclusively with his teeth and claws, till the giraffe and the eland and the kudu and the quagga and all the rest of them didn't know which way to jump, best beloved. They didn't indeed. After a long time, things lived forever so long in those days, they learned to avoid anything that looked like a leopard or an Ethiopian, and bit by bit the giraffe began, because his legs were the longest, they went away from the high veldt. They scuttled for days and days and days till they came to a great forest, exclusively full of trees and bushes and stripy, speckly, patchy, blatchy shadows, and there they hid. And after another long time, what with standing half in the shade and half out of it, and what with the slippery, slidey shadows of the trees falling on them, the giraffe grew blotchy, and the zebra grew stripy, and the eland and the kudu grew darker, with little wavy grey lines on their backs, like bark on a tree trunk. And so, though you could hear them and smell them, you could very seldom see them, and then only when you knew precisely where to look. They had a beautiful time in the exclusively spickly shadows of the forest, while the leopard and the Ethiopian ran about over the exclusively greyish, yellowish, reddish high veldt outside, wondering where all their breakfasts and their dinners and their teas had gone. At last they were so hungry that they ate rats and beetles and rock rabbits, the leopard and the Ethiopian, and then they had the big tummy ache both together, and then they met Bavian, the dog-headed barking baboon, who is quite the wisest animal in all South Africa. Said Leopard to Bavian, and it was a very hot day, "Where has all the game gone?" And Bavian winked. He knew. Said the Ethiopian to Bavian, "Can you tell me the present habitat of the aboriginal fauna?" That meant just the same thing, but the Ethiopian always used long words. He was a grown-up, you see. And Bavian winked. He knew. Then said Bavian, "The game has gone into other spots, and my advice to you, Leopard, is to go into other spots as soon as you can." And the Ethiopian said, "That is all very fine, but I wish to know whither the aboriginal fauna has migrated." Then said Bavian, "The aboriginal fauna has joined the aboriginal flora because it was high time for a change, and my advice to you, Ethiopian, is to change as soon as you can." That puzzled the leopard and the Ethiopian, but they set off to look for the aboriginal flora, and presently, after ever so many days, they saw a great high tall forest full of tree trunks, all exclusively speckled and spotted and spickled and dotted and splashed and slashed and hatched and cross-hatched with shadows. Say that quickly aloud, and you will see how very shadowy the forest must have been. "What is this?" said the leopard. "That is so exclusively dark, yet so full of little pieces of light." "I don't know," said the Ethiopian, "but it ought to be the aboriginal flora. I can smell giraffe and I can hear giraffe, but I can't see giraffe." "That's curious," said the leopard. "I suppose it is, because we have just come in out of the sunshine. I can smell zebra and I can hear zebra, but I can't see zebra." "Wait a bit," said the Ethiopian. "It's a long time since we've hunted them. Perhaps we've forgotten what they were like." "Fiddle," said the leopard. "I remember them perfectly on the high veldt, especially their marrow bones. Giraffe is about 17 feet high, of exclusively fulvous golden yellow from head to heel, and zebra is about 4.5 feet high, of exclusively grey fawn colour from head to heel." Said the Ethiopian, looking into the spickly shadows of the aboriginal flora forest. "Then they ought to show up in this dark place like ripe bananas in a smokehouse." But they didn't. The leopard and the Ethiopian hunted all day, and though they could smell them and hear them, they never saw any of them. "For goodness sake," said the leopard at tea time, "let us wait till it gets dark. This daylight hunting is a perfect scandal." So they waited till dark, and then the leopard heard something breathing sniffily in the starlight that fell all stripy through the branches. And he jumped at the noise, and it smelt like zebra, and it felt like zebra, and when he knocked it down it kicked like zebra, but he couldn't see it. So he said, "Be quiet, oh you person without any form. I'm going to sit on your head till morning, because there is something about you that I don't understand." Presently he heard a grunt and a crash and a scramble, and the Ethiopian called out, "I've caught a thing that I can't see. It smells like giraffe, and it kicks like giraffe, but it hasn't any other form." "Don't you trust it," said the leopard. "Sit on his head till the morning, same as me. They haven't any form, any of them." So they sat down on them hard till bright morning time, and then Leopard said, "What have you at the end of the table, brother?" The Ethiopian scratched his head and said, It ought to be exclusively a rich fulvous orange tawny from head to heel, and it ought to be giraffe, but it's covered all over with chestnut blotches. What have you got at the end of your table, brother? And the leopard scratched his head and said, it ought to be exclusively a delicate greyish fawn, and it ought to be zebra, but it is covered all over with black and purple stripes. What in the world have you been doing to yourself, zebra? Don't you know that you were on the high veld, and I could see you 10 miles off? You haven't any form. Yes, said the zebra, but this isn't the high veld, can't you see? I can now, said the leopard, but I couldn't see at all yesterday. How is it done? Let us up, said the zebra, and we will show you. They let the zebra and the giraffe get up, and Zebra moved away to some little thorn bushes where the sunlight fell all stripy, and Giraffe moved off to some tallish trees where the shadows fell all blotchy. Now watch, said the zebra and the giraffe. This is the way it's done. 1, 2, 3. And where's your breakfast? Leopard stared, and Ethiopian stared, but all they could see were stripy shadows and blotched shadows in the forest, but never a sign of zebra and giraffe. They had just walked off and hidden themselves in the shadowy forest. Hi, hi, said the Ethiopian. That's a trick worth learning. Take a lesson by it, Leopard. You show up in this dark place like a bar of soap in a coal scuttle. Ho, ho, said the leopard. Would it surprise you very much to know that you show up in this dark place like a mustard plaster on a sack of coals? Well, calling names won't catch dinner, said Ethiopian. The long and the little of it is that we won't match our backgrounds. I'm going to take Bavarian's advice. He told me I ought to change, and as I've nothing to change except my skin, I'm going to change that. What to? Said the leopard, tremendously excited. To a nice working blackish-brownish colour with a little purple in it and touches of slaty blue. It will be the very thing for hiding in hollows and behind trees. So he changed his skin then and there, and the leopard was more excited than ever. He had never seen a man change his skin before. But what about me? He said, when the Ethiopian had worked his last little finger into his fine new black skin. You take Bavarian's advice too. He told you to go into spots. So he did, said the leopard. I went into other spots as fast as I could. I went into this spot with you, and a lot of good it has done me. Oh, said the Ethiopian, Bavarian didn't mean spots in South Africa. He meant spots on your skin. What's the use of that? Said the leopard. Think of giraffe, said the Ethiopian. Or if you prefer stripes, think of zebra. They find their spots and stripes give them perfect satisfaction. Said the leopard. I wouldn't look like zebra, not for anything. Well, make up your mind, said the Ethiopian, because I'd hate to go hunting without you, but I must if you insist on looking like a sunflower against a tarred fence. I'll take spots then, said the leopard, but don't make 'em too vulgar big. I wouldn't look like giraffe, not for ever so much. I'll make 'em with tips of my fingers, said the Ethiopian. There's plenty of black left on my skin still. Stand over. Then the Ethiopian put his 5 fingers close together. There was plenty of black left on his new skin still, and he pressed them all over the leopard, and whenever the fine fingers touched, they left little black marks all close together. You can see them on any leopard's skin you like, best beloved. Sometimes the fingers slipped and the marks got a little blurred, but if you look closely at any leopard now, you will see that there are always 5 spots off, 5 black fingertips. Now you are a beauty, said the Ethiopian. You can lie out on the bare ground and look like a heap of pebbles. You can lie out on the nailed rocks and look like a piece of pudding stone. You can lie out on a leafy branch and look like a sunshine sifting through the leaves. And you can lie right across the centre of a path and look like nothing in particular. Think of that and purr. But if I'm all like this, said the leopard, why didn't you go spotty too? Oh, plain black's best for a nigger, said the Ethiopian. Now come along, and we'll see if we can't get even with Mr. 1, 2, 3, where's your breakfast? So they went away and lived happily ever afterward, best beloved. That is all. And now and then you will hear grown-ups say, can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? I don't think even grown-ups would keep on saying such a silly thing if the leopard and the Ethiopian hadn't done it once, do you? But they will never do it again, best beloved. They are quite contented as they are. How the Rhinoceros got his skin. Once upon a time, on an uninhabited island on the shores of the Red Sea, there lived a Parsee, from whose hat the rays of the sun were reflected in more than oriental splendour. And the Parsee lived by the Red Sea with nothing but his hat and his knife and a cooking stove of the kind that you must particularly never touch. And one day he took flour and water and currants and plums and sugar and things, and made himself one cake which was 2 feet across and 3 feet thick. It was indeed a superior comestible. That's magic. And he put it on the stove, because he was allowed to cook on that stove, and he baked it till it was all done brown and smelt most sentimental. But just as he was going to eat it, there came down to the beach from the altogether uninhabited interior one rhinoceros with a horn on his nose, 2 piggy eyes, and few manners. In those days the rhinoceros's skin fitted him quite tight. There were no wrinkles in it anywhere. He looked exactly like a Noah's Ark rhinoceros, but of course much bigger. All the same, he had no manners then, and he has no manners now, and he never will have any manners. He said, "How?" And the Parsee left that cake and climbed to the top of a palm tree with nothing on but his hat, from which the rays of the sun were always reflected in more than oriental splendour. And the rhinoceros upset the oil stove with his nose, and the cake rolled on the sand, and he spiked that cake on the horn of his nose, and he ate it. And he went away, waving his tail to the desolate and exclusively uninhabited interior. Then the Parsee came down from his palm tree, and put the stove on its legs, and recited the following: "Them that takes cakes which the Parsee man bakes makes dreadful mistakes." And there was a great deal more in that than you would think. Because 5 weeks later there was a heat wave in the Red Sea, and everybody took off all the clothes they had. The Parsee took off his hat, but the rhinoceros took off his skin, and carried it over his shoulder as he came down to the beach to bathe. In those days it buttoned underneath with 3 buttons and looked like a waterproof. He said nothing whatever about the Parsee's cake, because he had eaten it all, and he never had any manners then, since, or henceforward. He waddled straight into the water and blew bubbles through his nose, leaving his skin on the beach. Presently the Parsee came by and found the skin, and he smiled one smile that ran all round his face 2 times. Then he danced 3 times round the skin and rubbed his hands. Then he went to his camp and filled his hat with cake crumbs, for the Parsee never ate anything but cake, and never swept out of his camp. He took that skin, and he shook that skin, and he scrubbed that skin, and he rubbed that skin just as full of old, dry, stale, tickly cake crumbs and some burned currants as ever it could possibly hold. Then he climbed to the top of the palm tree and waited for the rhinoceros to come out of the water and put it on. And the rhinoceros did. He buttoned it up with the 3 buttons, and it tickled like cake crumbs in bed. Then he wanted to scratch, but that made it worse, and then he lay down on the sand and rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled, and every time he rolled the cake crumbs tickled him worse and worse and worse. Then he ran to the palm tree and rubbed and rubbed and rubbed himself against it. He rubbed so much and so hard that he rubbed his skin into a great fold over his shoulders, and another fold underneath, where the buttons used to be, but he rubbed the buttons off. And he rubbed some more folds over his legs, and it spoiled his temper, but it didn't make the least difference to the cake crumbs. They were all inside his skin, and they tickled. So he went home very angry indeed, and horribly scratchy. And from that day to this very day, every rhinoceros has great folds in his skin, and a very bad temper, all on account of the cake crumbs inside. How the Whale got his throat. In the sea once upon a time, O my best beloved, there was a whale, and he ate fishes. He ate the starfish and the garfish and the crab and the dab and the plaice and the dace and the skate and his mate and the mackerel and the pickerel and the really truly twirly whirly eel. All the fishes he could find in all the sea he ate with his mouth. Just so. Till at last there was only one small fish left in all the sea, and he was a small 'stute fish, and he swam a little behind the whale's right ear, so as not to be in harm's way. Then the whale stood up on his tail and said, "I'm hungry." And the small 'stute fish said in a small 'stute voice, "Noble and generous cetacean, have you ever tasted man?" "No," said the whale. "What is it like?" "Nice," said the small 'stute fish. "Nice, but nubbly." "Then fetch me some," said the whale, and he made the sea froth up with his tail. "One at a time is enough," said the 'stute fish. "If you swim to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, that is magic, you will find, sitting on a raft in the middle of the sea, with nothing on but a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders," you must not forget the suspenders, O best beloved, "and a jackknife, one shipwrecked mariner, who, it is only fair to tell you, is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." So the whale swam and swam to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, as fast as he could swim, and on a raft, in the middle of the sea, with nothing to wear except a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders, you must particularly remember the suspenders, best beloved, and a jackknife, he found one single solitary shipwrecked mariner trailing his toes in the water. Then the whale opened his mouth back and back and back till it nearly touched his tail, and he swallowed the shipwrecked mariner, and the raft he was sitting on, and his blue canvas breeches, and the suspenders, which you must not forget, and the jackknife. He swallowed them all down into his warm, dark inside cupboards, and then he smacked his lips and turned round 3 times on his tail. But as soon as the mariner, who was a man of infinite resource and sagacity, remember, as soon as he found himself truly inside the whale's warm, dark inside cupboards, he stumped, and he jumped, and he thumped, and he bumped, and he pranced, and he danced, and he banged, and he clanged, and he hit, and he bit, and he leapt, and he crept, and he prowled, and he howled, and he hopped, and he dropped, and he cried, and he sighed, and he crawled, and he bawled, and he stepped, and he leapt, and he danced hornpipes where he shouldn't. And the whale felt most unhappy indeed. So he said to the 'stute fish, "This man is very nubbly, and besides he is making me hiccup. What shall I do?" "Tell him to come out," said the 'stute fish. So the whale called down his own throat to the shipwrecked mariner, "Come out and behave yourself. Hup, I've got hiccups." "Nay, nay," said the mariner, "not so, but far otherwise. Take me to my native shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and I'll think about it." And he began to dance more than ever. "You had better take him home," said the 'stute fish to the whale. "I ought to have warned you that he is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." So the whale swam and swam and swam, with both flippers and his tail, as hard as he could for the hiccups. And at last he saw the mariner's native shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and he rushed halfway up the beach and opened his mouth wide and wide and wide and said, "Change here for Portsmouth, Southampton, and all stations north." And just as he said, "North," the mariner walked out of his mouth. But while the whale had been swimming, the mariner, who was indeed a person of infinite resource and sagacity, had taken his jackknife and cut up the raft into a little square grating, all running crisscross, and he had tied it firm with his suspenders. Now you know why you were told not to forget the suspenders. And he dragged that grating good and tight into the whale's throat, and there it stuck. Then he recited the following: "By means of a grating I have stopped you eating." And he stepped out on the shingle and went home unscathed. Later he married and lived happily ever afterward. So did the whale, but from that day on the grating in his throat, which he could neither cough up nor swallow down, prevented him eating anything except very, very small fish. And that is the reason why whales nowadays never eat men or boys or little girls. The small 'stute fish went and hid himself in the mud under the door-sills of the equator. He was afraid that the whale might be angry with him. The sailor took the jackknife home. He was wearing the blue canvas breeches when he walked out on the shingle. The suspenders were left behind, you see, to tie the grating with. And that is the end of that tale. Old Man Kangaroo. Not always was the kangaroo as now we do behold him, but a different animal with 4 short legs. He was grey, and he was woolly, and his pride was inordinate. He danced on an outcrop in the middle of Australia, and he went to the little god Unkwa. He went to Unkwa at 6 before breakfast, saying, "Make me different from all other animals by 5 this afternoon." Up jumped Unkwa from his seat on the sand flat and shouted, "Go away!" He was grey, and he was woolly, and his pride was inordinate. He danced on a rock ledge in the middle of Australia, and he went to the middle god Unkwing. He went to Unkwing at 8 after breakfast, saying, "Make me different from all other animals. Make me also wonderfully popular by 5 this afternoon." Up jumped Unkwing from his burrow in the spinnax and shouted, "Go away!" He was grey, and he was woolly, and his pride was inordinate. He danced on a sandbank in the middle of Australia, and he went to the big god Unkwong. He went to Unkwong at 10 before dinner time, saying, "Make me different from all other animals. Make me popular and wonderfully run after by 5 this afternoon." Up jumped Unkwong from his bath in the salt pan and shouted, "Yes, I will." Unkwong called Dingo, yellow dog Dingo, always hungry, dusty in the sunshine, and showed him Kangaroo. Unkwong said, "Dingo, wake up, Dingo. Do you see that gentleman dancing on an ash pit? He wants to be popular and very truly run after. Dingo, make him so." Up jumped Dingo, yellow dog Dingo, and said, "What, that cat rabbit?" Off ran Dingo, yellow dog Dingo, always hungry, grinning like a coal scuttle, ran after Kangaroo. Off went the proud Kangaroo on his 4 little legs, like a bunny. This, O beloved, ends the first part of the tale. For he ran through the desert, he ran through the mountains, he ran through the salt pans, he ran through the reed beds, he ran through the blue gums, he ran through the spinifex. He ran till his front legs ached. He had to. Still ran Dingo, yellow dog Dingo, always hungry, grinning like a rat trap, never getting nearer, never getting farther, ran after Kangaroo. He had to. Still ran Kangaroo, old man Kangaroo. He ran through the trees, he ran through the mulga, he ran through the long grass, he ran through the short grass, he ran through the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer. He ran till his hind legs ached. He had to. Still ran Dingo, yellow dog Dingo, hungrier and hungrier, grinning like a horse collar, never getting nearer, never getting farther, and they came to the Wollongong River. Now there wasn't any bridge, and there wasn't any ferry boat, and Kangaroo didn't know how to get over, so he stood on his legs and hopped. He had to. He hopped through the flinders, he hopped through the cinders, he hopped through the deserts in the middle of Australia. He hopped like a kangaroo. First he hopped 1 yard, then he hopped 3 yards, then he hopped 5 yards. His legs grew stronger, his legs grew longer. He hadn't any time for rest or refreshment, and he wanted them very much. Still ran Dingo, Yellow Dog Dingo, very much bewildered, very much hungry, and wondering what in the world or out of it made Old Man Kangaroo hop. For he hopped like a cricket, like a pea in a saucepan, or a new rubber ball on a nursery floor. He had to. He tucked up his front legs, he hopped on his hind legs, he stuck out his tail for a balance weight behind him, and he hopped through the Darling Downs. He had to. Still ran Dingo, Tired Dog Dingo, hungrier and hungrier, very much bewildered, and wondering when in the world, or out of it, would Old Man Kangaroo stop. Then came Unquang from his bath in the salt pan and said, "It's 5 o'clock." Down sat Dingo, poor dog Dingo, always hungry, dusty in the sunshine, hung out his tongue and howled. Down sat Kangaroo, Old Man Kangaroo, stuck out his tail like a milking stool behind him and said, "Oh, thank goodness that's finished." Then said Unquang, who is always a gentleman, "Why aren't you grateful to Yellow Dog Dingo? Why don't you thank him for all he has done for you?" Then said Kangaroo, tired old Kangaroo, "He's chased me out of the homes of my childhood. He's chased me out of my regular meal times. He's altered my shape so I'll never get it back. And he's played old Scratch with my legs." Then said Unquang, "Perhaps I'm mistaken, but didn't you ask me to make you different from all the other animals, as well as to make you very truly sought after? And now it is 5 o'clock. "Yeah," said Kangaroo. "I wish that I hadn't. I thought you would do it by charms and incantations, but this is a practical joke." "Joke," said Unquang from his bath in the blue gums. "Say that again and I'll whistle up Dingo and run your hind legs off." "No," said the Kangaroo. "I must apologise. Legs are legs, and you needn't alter them so far as I'm concerned. I only meant to explain to your lordliness that I have had nothing to eat since morning, and I'm very empty indeed." "Yes," said Dingo, Yellow Dog Dingo. "I'm just in the same situation. I've made him different from all other animals. But what may I have for tea?" Then said Unquang from his bath in the salt pan, "Come and ask me about it tomorrow, because I'm going to wash." So they were left in the middle of Australia, Old Man Kangaroo and Yellow Dog Dingo, and each said, "That's your fault."